Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Anna Joe.
Good
Dave
afternoon.
Mondolowski here.
Hi, Dave. How are you?
Okay.
Good. I think we're just on a pause for the moment. Oh, there's Rob.
Good afternoon, Anna Joe. How are
Hey,
you?
how are you?
Doing great. You?
Good, thanks.
Yeah, good.
Motion to wait for Tony?
Yeah, he just walked out the back door.
Okay. Hey, Rob.
I hear Jeff, but I don't see him.
Hey, Jeff.
Hi, Anna Joe.
Oh, hey, Jeff. How are you?
Very good.
Hi, Dave. How are you?
All right.
I think there's a lone wolf
I
here.
am the lone wolf here today.
Mustn't, he's on the way. Mr. Fitness, he is walking from the Justice Center.
He's walking.
Yeah.
Faster than driving at this point.
There he is.
All right.
That's why he's 100 pounds less than I am. Did you see an email?
Yes.
The one person item.
Mhm.
I'm just gonna not see anything.
Mhm.
Perfect.
All right, good. All right. All right, why don't we rise and take allegiance? Excuse me, is Dave on the line?
Yes.
Wondolowski?
I am on the line, Jeff.
Okay, terrific, then we can start. I pledge allegiance to the
Allegiance to the
flag
flag
Pledge
of the
allegiance to the
United States
flag of the
of
United
America,
States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I will note that all board members are present, Mr. Frost, Mr. Wondolowski, Ms. Underwood, Davis Chappelle. Via video conference, I am here in person. I will move to approve the minutes from the January 20th, 2021 board meeting.
Second.
Thank you. Any question or comment? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Hi.
Aye.
All right, I heard all three, including myself. Pass that motion. I will move to acknowledge the Secretary of State's advisories and directives. We have advisory 2020-101, which recognizes minor political parties following the 2020 general election. In fact, I think delists the Libertarian Party because it was 3%. Threshold. Directive 2021. Is that correct?
Yeah, the first one's an advisory, the second one.
Oh, thank you for pointing that out. The first is an advisory 2021-01 directive, the update to the election officials manual and related directives. Mr. Gallagher gave us a summary of those updates, the important ones in our package. And then the directive 2020-109, which deals with electronic certification of questions and issues. It's confidential, directive in nature, not for disclosure. And finally, we have a walk-on 2020-110, which I believe is the, is that the number?
Yeah, I believe so, yes.
Deals with drop-off ballot boxes, one that was issued last year for absentee ballots to be dropped off. If there's a second?
Second.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, yes.
Can I just make one comment when it's appropriate?
It is, it's open for comment now.
I just want to bring to the board's attention, this deals with the new Secretary of State directives that Tony Gallagher provided a summary. There's 2 points I want to bring to your attention. One of them deals with Chapter 4, which is ballot proofing. And what's new in there is that the board has to take action with those. So what we're going to be doing with the ballot proofs is we're going to create a proofing policy to present to the board for approval at a future meeting. It'll kind of be like in the spirit of what we do with the ballot remake process. And so within the next couple meetings, we'll bring that forward for your review and approval. And then will be the way in which the official policy for proofing ballots. So that will be coming up either next meeting or meeting following. That's rooted in changes. Also, in Chapter 5, which deals with absentee voting, it now requires us every time that we utilize a third party for vote by mail processes, 70 days greater to have a board vote to do that. That'll kind of become one of those standing agenda items as we approach bigger elections that we'll start seeing. So those are two changes that, while everything impacts everyone, those ones specifically hone in on the board and will require some kind of board action.
So thank you for those summaries and pointing them out. They're important changes. As far as the proofing the ballots, is the adoption of a policy by this board would suffice?
Yes. So our read of it is that the board must develop, maintain, and practice a policy and procedure to ensure the responsibility of proofing at all levels. So obviously we have a process that we currently do, but we need to put that into more a formalized policy for board.
Because I know it's a very intricate and detailed process that takes place to proof. And thanks to our staff, we haven't had the issue of misspelled names or not the right location on the ballot and other matters. In fact, just as a point, do we still send out the names to the candidates, how it will appear on the ballot to get their approval?
Yeah, we send out ballot proofs
To them.
to the candidates, to municipalities if they have an issue on the ballot. We do that.
With regards to the contract for the absentee voting, I know there's going to be an item on this agenda later.
Right.
Does this conflict with that in any way, or they're not?
It actually puts us in compliance because there are going to be two votes. We'll take one on an extension and one that is the actual 70+ day out to the party vendor.
Okay,
So
thank you.
we're using it for the first time today.
Are there any other questions or comments concerning the advisory and
No.
3 directors?
No.
Okay.
No.
Thank you. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Motion passes unanimously. I'll move to approve the final ballot order for the February 23rd, 2021 Village of Woodmere recall election. If there's a second.
Second.
Thank you. Second's been heard. Although, any other questions or comments? And hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
And just, Mr. Pilati, early in-person voting is taking place, although very light.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will move to approve the final ballot order for the March 16, 2020 Mayfield Village special election. If there's a second.
Second.
Thank you. I heard a second. Any question or comment? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. And a preliminary approval of the ballot order for the May 4th, 2020 primary election. That is different than what was emailed to us, correct? We were emailed something by Ms. Walker this afternoon. Is that a new order?
Yes, there were adjustments made. They were pretty minor.
My fellow board members, did you receive that email from Ms. Walker earlier this afternoon or late this morning?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Jason's here. He can,
Jason, could you tell us why we received
It was
that?
typically dated to come before the board again, within 30 days of the election. So it's just the date of the next board meeting we can will.
I'm sorry, why don't you come up here just for the
Yeah,
record?
we can't, I
Jason?
couldn't hear him.
Right. He's explaining why we received the revisions. Thank you, Jason. Your name?
Jason Bullock, Assistant Manager of the Balance Department. The only adjustment
Okay, go ahead, Jason.
was to the date of the next board meeting where it will come before the board again. So I believe it was originally April 12th, and now it will become before the board at the April 6th.
I see. So the only change was the date in the paragraph. It was previously reported that this ballot order would be brought up to the board on April 12th, but now it's going to be brought up on April 6th. So nothing of substance other than the date. Thank you, Jason. Any questions for Jason? Okay, hearing none. I made a motion for the preliminary approval of the ballot order for the May. No, May 4th, 20 primary election. Was there a second?
Second.
Second.
Thank you. Any other question or comment after hearing from Mr. Cool? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. We're going to move on to the approval for the outsourcing of the printing and mailing of the vote by mail ballots for the May 4th, 2020 primary election. In support of conjunction with that, there's a letter dated February 16th, dated today for Mr. Pilati's signature. Why don't you, I don't know who's going to tee this up for us, Mr. Pilati?
Right, so that letter actually goes with number 7, so we'll on both of these. So number 7 on it. So what we currently, Midwest Directors are a ballot printing vendor, and they we're under contract with them until May 3rd of 2021, which gets all elections up to that point. So currently, Woodmere, Mayfield Village's election, and then May 4th starts a new period in time where we need a new vendor. Our contract is expiring, as we said, on May 3rd, and we were going to go out to release a request for proposal for ballot printing. However, when we were getting ready to do that,
Mute everyone. Or Robin, can you?
Okay.
I think that's better. So we were in the process getting ready to release a bid for proposal for ballot printing, and we had gotten word that the Secretary of State was going to release some new directives that would directly impact or have language impacting ballot printing. So we put a pause on, and then in fact, those directives were released. They had to go under a 2-week review period, and then ultimately the Secretary of State, from comments that he received from around the state, published then his final directive. Those just came out, and when we're trying to look at the timing to put something out, have it out for a couple-week period, get it back, review and approve, and meet now this 70-day deadline that we have, where the board must, in a public meeting, take a vote to outsource the printing. It just all didn't come together. So in our current Midwest contract is the ability to extend for a period of time. And so we determined what was the shortest period of time that we could extend and not harm the execution of elections. And that is May 4th until August 2nd, which is the day before the August election. This way it would cover that May 4th primary, as well as if any additional elections come up over the summer. We will, though, release a bid by month's end, by the end of February, have it out, and we should be coming with a recommendation on a contract either at the April or the first May board meeting, for the 70-day deadline for August already is 25th. So that is what that document is. It was discussed with Midwest Direct. They are agreeable to all the language in that, and had agreed same pricing that was in effect in this the period right now will carry forth through this extended renewable period.
I've made a motion to approve the outsourcing of the printing material. I don't know if there was a second for that.
Second.
Okay, are there questions for Mr. Pilati? I know we've gotten a copy of the letter, written in quite a bit of legalese concerning the extension and our need to exercise it, as well as that letter points out to the vendor certain requirements that they comply with under Directive 2021-05 concerning the way they operate their business and process these absentee ballots. It seems prudent to me to make this extension at this time, with the understanding that we'll be taking another look at printing.
Yes.
Looking forward. Any other questions or comments?
I do have a comment, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the Secretary of State's language in the directive that allows us to consider any action, appearance of impropriety or political bias that the choice of vendor might impute. And I think that language that's in this letter ought to go to every vendor, not just, in our, at least we should consider having that in all of our RFPs, this acknowledgement that, we do, because of the work that we do and our sensitivity to all voters in our county, that we expect all of our vendors, regardless of their political affiliation or beliefs, to respect our process. And it should apply to all vendors. And I think that we should perhaps consider including that in our RFPs for contracts as well. Just so our vendors understand we are sensitive and we're doing the work of all voters in the county.
I think that's a point well taken. Mr. Messon, that would be something we could do going forward. I don't see any issue with that.
No, I think,
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to echo Ina Joe's comments also. I well said, and it's good. It's really a matter of good public policy.
Thank you, Mr. Wondolowski. I agree. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chappell. Any other questions or comments concerning the motion? Okay, that's on the approval to outsource the printing and mailing of vote by mail ballots by May 4th, 2021. Primary election. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. I will move to approve the renewal of the ballot printing contract with Midwest Direct in an amount not to exceed $327,448.08 for the renewal term May 4th, 2021 through August 2nd, 2021. If there's a second.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Frost. Any other question or comment? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Terrific. I know, Mr. Lawler, we're going to tee up this, and we've got a hearing scheduled. The certification of candidates for issues May 4th primary election, is that involved the hearing too, Mr. Lawler?
I think he may be on mute.
And additional services, yes, it does, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so the certification of candidates for the November 2nd election in lieu of the May 4th does not require a hearing. Is that correct? All right, I'm going to move through a few of these items and indulge my board members just to get through them, and then we'll circle back for the hearing and then the certification of candidates and issues for May 4th. Does that sound like a plan?
Sure.
Yes, well, Dave, Rob, okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Great. All right, thank you. I will move to the certification of candidates for the November 2nd, 2020 general election in lieu of the May 4th, 2020 primary election. If there's a second.
Second.
Thank you. This is set forth on our agenda too. Any questions for Mr. Lawler in that regard? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we've got a name certified for November 2nd general election ballot. I'm now going to move to acknowledge candidates' withdrawals. If there's a second.
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 Thank you for the seconds, and that is the withdrawal of Kevin Kuzamal from Parma Ward 6, Republican. Andrew Savole, Parma Council Ward 2, his first filing. Andrew Savole, Parma Council Ward 2, his second filing, and then the withdrawal of candidates from the September 14th, 2020 primary election. Mark Crosby and Stephen Ward, and Albert Serafini, Homestead, Council Ward 1. Any question or comment? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Passes unanimously. And then I will move to acknowledge the resignations from elected office and appointments to elected office. That would be Ms. Brook, Bay Village City Council, Sarah Burns, Mayor, Bay Village City Council, Matthew Burke, Garfield Heights City Council, Vic Kalova of Garfield Heights Mayor, and Brian Bichetti, Parma City Council. And the appointment elected office is Sarah Burns, Mayor, Bay Village, Martin Sweeney, Cuyahoga County Council, Matthew Burke, City of Garfield Heights Mayor, and Camille Schumann, Parma City Council. There's a second.
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 Thank you.
And just to
Question?
clarify, the way that read, it's Sarah Burns, Mayor for Bay Village City Council.
Oh, thank you, Mr.
That
Frost.
first appointment. Yeah.
All right, thank you for the correction. Any other question or comment? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Okay, and just some more agenda items. I move to approve to allocate a total of 5 voting booths, 2 DS200 precinct scanners, one ADA auto marking device, and 3 electronic poll books be the smallest election I've ever made. February 23rd, 2021 in the Village of Woodmere recall election. There's a second?
Second.
Second.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Passes unanimously. I will move to approve the allocation of 11 voting booths, 4 DS200 precinct scanners, 1 ADA automark device, and 5 electronic poll books for the March 16th, 2020 Mayfield Village special election, a little twice the size of Woodmere. There's a second.
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 Thank you. Any question or comment concerning that deployment? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously, and I'll move for the preliminary approval. This will be back in front of the board. But the preliminary approval to allocate a total of 1,016 voting booths, 148 DS200 precinct scanners, 54 88 auto marking scanners, and 205 electronic poll books for the May 4th, 2020 primary election. If there's a second.
Second.
Thank you for the
I
second.
just have a question. I'm sorry. Is there some reason we are doing a preliminary approval before a final approval on this one?
Yes, so we're required to do a preliminary, I think about 90 days out before the election, and then come back within 30 days of the election and do the final approval. So we actually, at a previous meeting, the Woodmere and the Mayfield Village, we did do a preliminary, and now we're coming back for the final. And so we'll probably come back at the April meeting with a final approval for this. This is required with the election official manual for us to do the double up like that.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Thank you. Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Okay, motion passes unanimously. What we have left here is a human resource approval of personnel agenda, some new business to discuss, and I'm going to make a motion to go in executive session, some other matters. So this is probably a good time to move on to the certification of candidates and issues for the May 4th, 2021 primary election. Mr. Lawler now.
Brian Krasinski is running for Strasbourg Council at Large. His petition is valid in all respects. When he filed the petition, as you probably all know, we have a line on our petition is how name should appear on the ballot. And he did put down Brian Krasinski. Subsequent to that, he sent me an email requesting his name go on as Brian Cruz, which you should have delivered to you this morning, that email. He also, I believe he has Mr. Alto is representing him. We got an email from him, from Mr. Alto, Friday night, giving us some background information on how Mr. Cruz is known in the community. And he believes that under the revised code that they're permitted to do what we call nickname as it appears on the ballot. And we don't have the authority in CPS to authorize that, so we're asking the board to review that request and determine so we can inform ballot department as to how it should actually go on the ballot.
Other than this matter concerning the name on the ballot, are there any other issues with the candidates for certification for the May 4th, 2020 primary election?
None.
Okay, that's the only matter then. That should be heard then before this board certifies, because they have to make a decision.
Well, yes.
And hearing that, we're going to tee this up. I let my fellow board members know. Mr. Alto on the line there?
Yes, Chairman, I'm here.
Okay, and Mr. Cruz, I see you're there. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and I need to recuse myself from any deliberation or even running this matter because I have reached out to Mr. Alto after he became an attorney and asked him to do a little legal work for me. And he did a fine job at that, and so I had to pay him. And because of that, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to sit in this hearing or take a vote on this matter. So having said that, Mr. Frost, would you mind taking and managing this hearing and tee it up for the party?
Not at all. Happy to do that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for clarifying the reason that you need to recuse. We have a little bit of a time delay as we're all used to with Zoom, so I will ask Mr. Alto and Mr. Cruz to be patient with that. What I would like to ask Mr. Alto to start out with this hearing process Other than Mr. Cruz, do you expect to call any witnesses other than Mr. Cruz, as I said?
No, no other witnesses will be called. Thank you.
Okay. And do you expect to testify, or are you only presenting legal argument?
I will just be presenting legal argument supported by the evidence that I sent on Friday afternoon.
Okay. And thank you for that. What we will do then, we'll have Mr. Cruz or Krasuski, as the case may be, to be sworn at the appropriate time. But I would ask you to start. If you have a brief opening statement you'd like to give us. I don't think we need to keep a clock on you, but I'd ask you to keep it about 2 to 3 minutes at most.
Sure. Thank you, Board Member Frost. So we are here, Anthony Alto on behalf of Brian Cruz, 1801 Euclid Avenue, Suite 92, Cleveland, Ohio, 44115. We're here this afternoon to ask the board to allow Mr. Cruz to be placed on the ballot as Brian Cruz. This is because the Ohio Elections Officials Manual allows a derivative of a name to be on the ballot. Case law permits a name that has been adopted by a candidate and by which the community knows him, and to be placed on the ballot. And because the board has recently ruled in a similarly situated circumstance. So first off, Chapter 4 of the Ohio Election Officials Manual says that a candidate's name can be used other than his legal name if it is a natural derivative of the candidate's legal name. Brian Cruz's legal name is Krasuski, K-R-U-S-Z-E-W-S-K-I. According to Merriam-Webster's online dictionary, a derivative is a word formed from another word or base. In Mr. Cruz's case, Mr. Cruz goes by Cruz, K-R-U-S-Z, which is the first 5 letters of his legal name, Krasuski. Therefore, the board should find that that is a natural derivative of his legal name and should allow him to be placed on the ballot as Brian Cruz. The board is not satisfied with that argument. Under the Morrison case, the court has held that a candidate can be placed on the ballot with the name that he has adopted and by which the community knows him. And we have provided a dearth of evidence, articles, Facebook posts, even contracts that all show that Mr. Cruz goes by Brian Cruz. Final argument is that the board has recently ruled in a similar circumstance. In August of 2020, a gentleman by the name of Richard Neal presented his petitions under Richard Rocky Neal, and there was a subsequent hearing after he requested that his name be placed on the ballot as Rocky Neal. He did provide evidence, and the board is satisfied that that's the name he adopted and by which the community knows him, and so allowed him to go on the ballot as Rocky Neal. Similarly here, Mr. Cruz, Brian Cruz, has presented petitions under his legal name, Brian Krasuski. Now he's asking the board to allow him to go onto the ballot as Brian Cruz. And we have provided that evidence showing that that is the name, Brian Cruz, that he has adopted and by which he goes. For those reasons, we humbly ask the board to allow Mr. Cruz to be placed on the ballot as Brian Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Alto. Before we proceed forward and hear from your witness, the other members, Ms. Davis Chappelle and Mr. Wondolowski, do either of you have any questions for Mr. Alto at this point?
No, I may have a question of Mr. Alto just with respect to the Rocky Neal case later, just to, I think that case might be distinguishable, but I can wait until we hear the evidence or the testimony of Mr. Cruz.
That's the same for me. I can wait until we hear him.
All right. Thank you both. Mr. Alto, please proceed and call your witness, and we'll then have him sworn in.
Very good. Brian, if you're ready.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay.
So let's, if the court reporter could swear our witness for us.
You raise your right hand, please. You solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cruz, how long have you lived in Strongsville?
Our family moved here about 6 years ago in 2015.
Great. Okay, thank you. And why did you want to run for public office in Strongsville?
It actually stems back from my grandfather. He was a fireman and a business owner in Elyria, and he always asked me growing up, when have you paid your community rent? And that's a life of service is something that's been very special to me since graduating high school. I served in the Marines. Upon exiting and the Strongsville relationship here, I sit on the finance committee for the school district. I help the Strongsville Connections High School program as a mentor. I'm a Rotary member of about 8 years, a chamber member, and an opportunity for me to serve and continue to live a life of service as a council member for the city of Strongsville would just continue that legacy my grandfather taught me growing up and to continue to serve the community around me.
Thank you. Now, when you decided to run for office, did you consult with anybody on the mechanics of running?
Yes, I was fortunate to know a couple of ward councilmen that are currently council members of the city, as well as the, I'll call him outgoing council at large, Matt Schoenhut, and just really on the specifics of the opportunity, some details, what it entails, as well as providing due diligence that I can help my wife and I kind of make a better decision to serve the community.
So did anybody tell you to file petitions as Brian Kruzewski as opposed to Brian Cruz?
Yes, people that are close to the election process, as well as these councilmen that are already in place, thought it'd be best due to the timeline, which if I could back up a little bit further, I was in Florida with my family when I'd heard the news that the council at large was no longer running for council at large. During that time process, the deadline was that Wednesday. So upon returning from Florida, gathering quick due diligence, making a good decision, and the information received from those ward councilmen, it would be best in order for my petition to be received by my legal name, Brian Kruzewski. They had also advised me after I had been, petitions been received and accepted, that I contact legal counsel, which I did, and then proceed during this process, which we've done, I think, pretty much immediately after accepted, to get the name changed to Brian Cruz versus Kruzewski is how I'm known in the city. So that way my petitions would have been accepted. I would have been able an opportunity to serve and be on the May primary as well as the November general election.
Now, you own a business in Strongsville, correct?
Yes.
And how does everybody know you in your business?
Everyone knows me as Brian Cruz. And that actually started since I've been here in Strongsville in 2013. As you guys can all see from my last name, Kruzewski is very hard to pronounce, very hard to spell. And as a businessman, and even back to an Exhibit D in high school, in the newspaper, I was known as Cruz. It's a lot easier to say and spell. And I've just known that process even back in high school up until now, as well as in the community and in my business.
And what's the name that you use on any of your social media accounts?
Brian Cruz.
And what about your civic? I know you're part of the Rotary Club. What are you part of any other civic groups? And what name do people know you by in those groups?
They all know me as Brian Cruz. To mention a couple, just not to just continue all the exhibits that we've attached is the Optimist Club, the Rotary Club, the Chamber here in Strongsville, amongst others I can't recall that are probably in the exhibits.
And finally, in terms of contracts, how do you sign your contracts for your business? What name do you use?
Those contracts that you see here in the exhibit are under Brian Cruz. Some other contracts are under Kruzewski, but it just depends on the document itself. But the majority of those go by Brian Cruz.
Who would call you Brian Kruzewski? When would you ever use that name?
My parents would definitely call me Brian Kruzewski. If I'm in trouble, to say the last time I've been called Kruzewski, I could not recall. And as a 40-year-old man, I have not gotten in trouble from my parents lately. But I can't recall off the cuff.
Thank you. I have no further questions, board member.
Thank you. Do any of the other board members have questions for the witness?
I have a question, Mr. Chairman. When you lend money or take a loan out from a bank, what name do you use?
My legal name.
Your legal name. What name is on your driver's license?
My legal name.
Legal name. Okay. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
I just
Thank
have a
you.
question, Mr. Cruz.
Yes, ma'am.
Could you just tell me again why you ended up signing the petition and the declaration of candidacy and using your full name? Because underneath, I mean, it does say use your full, it appears to be your full name, and it says print your name as it should appear on the ballot right on that declaration and petition. So did it occur to you to pause at that point, or did you think that you might want to put the name you intended to appear on the ballot on the actual form?
Yes, and I did pause, and the main agenda here was for me to get on the ballot. And being that the legal name, the registered name here in Cuyahoga County was the Brian J. Krzyzewski, and taking, I'll call it counsel amongst people that are already councilmen in the city, they advised me, due to the deadline, which was that Wednesday, that in order for my petitions to be received, and even my thought process too, because if I had turned those in as Brian Cruz and been denied, I would have been past the deadline, thus not accepted for an opportunity to run for Strongsville Council at large in my city, my community. So this is why I started the process of putting that as Brian Krzyzewski, and then immediately started the process to get the name changed to a more formal setting like this board, and an opportunity to provide more in-depth evidence, which Mr. Alto has done.
Any further questions from either of the other members?
No.
Just looking over, those were very helpful. I'm just seeing my own notes if I have any other questions, which I don't. Mr. Alto, is any other evidence other than the exhibits that you've already provided to us that you want us to consider in reaching our decision?
There is more evidence that Mr. Cruz has provided, but it's essentially just more the same types of stories, more articles, all the same, just all referring to Brian Cruz. I thought what I submitted should be enough. Okay.
So at this point, you're asking that the exhibits that you had attached with the previous filings be entered into evidence and be considered by this board in making its decision?
Yes, board member.
Okay. And do you have any other witnesses or anything further before you make your conclusion?
I do not, no.
All right. You don't have to say anything more, but if you want to sum up with what we've heard from Mr. Cruz and ask us, anything further or have anything further you'd like to tell us, please proceed. And again, try to keep it around a minute or two.
Sure. I would just like to highlight the evidence that I did provide for the board, including Mr. Cruz's testimony that it should be clear and obvious that he goes by Brian Cruz. Everybody knows him as Brian Cruz. He holds himself out to the public as Brian Cruz. Additionally, under the Ohio Election Officials Manual, he should be allowed on the ballot as Brian Cruz because Cruz is a natural derivative of Krzyzewski. So we would humbly ask that the board allow him to be placed on the ballot as Brian Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Alto. Would either of the other board members? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think we have in front of us, or you could probably pull up in your notes there, your email, an opinion from our law director that pretty much states that, the deviation from the declaration petition would not satisfy even the relaxed substantial compliance requirements. I'm not sure that I don't like the concept of it to begin with. First of all, I have Wondolowski's my name. Certainly ran on a ballot with that name. I'm not known by that name well. In fact, people do call me Wando on regular occasion. So I'm not in favor of this. But I also think we have a substantial compliance requirement standard here, and maybe Mark could weigh in on that.
That's a good point, Mr. Wondolowski. So go ahead, Anuja.
I was going to say, I would like to hear from legal counsel, but before we hear from him, I would like to, the question I was going to ask Mr. Alto, since he brought up the Rocky Neal case, was to, I don't, for a couple reasons, I don't think that necessarily sets any precedent for us, because in that case, he wasn't changing his last name. Rocky was more of, I sort of characterized in the nickname kind of change that you mentioned in that the elections officials manual speaks to. And also for me, what seems to be significant in my view is the fact that in the Rocky Neal case, if my recollection is correct, that his chosen name, Rocky Neal, actually did appear in the declaration and in the petition for candidacy. So it's, you in your opening, you said that you thought that case was similar to the current matter. And I think for those reasons, it may not be, but if you care to distinguish that or speak to those elements where I think the case is a little bit different, that would be helpful before we perhaps hear from our legal counsel.
Sure, Board Member Chappelle.
Thank you,
So
Mr. Muffin. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Alto. Yes, please.
All right. So my argument for the similarity is that the petition for Mr. Neal read Richard Rocky Neal. So the name did appear. Mr. Cruz, when he submitted his petitions, it said Brian Kruzewski. Those first 5 letters, KRUSZ, were still on the petition, just like Mr. Neal's petition. It appears that maybe we disagree on that, but that's my argument of why it's similar. It's because Cruz still did appear on the declaration of candidacy.
I guess I might have a different viewpoint or be more inclined to agree with your position if his candidacy, if it said, Richard Cruz, in quotes, Kruzinski, because it would then be apparent on the face of the form and the declaration that was his chosen name. But just I was just curious about your comment in the opening about that case being similar. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Musson, I did want to hear from you, and I know both of my fellow board members had asked that as well. If you can give us your opinion on what we've heard and on this issue. I think there's a couple issues I'd like to hear about, both the natural derivative issue, but also I believe we call it the substantial compliance, or you may clarify for me there what term I'm looking for. But Mr. Musson, if you could address those issues for us.
Sure thing, Mr. Frost. I agree with what Mr. Alto is saying about the natural derivative being an allowed nickname for the real name, or there's a secondary consideration if the candidate is widely known by their preferred name or their chosen moniker for the ballot. The board has the discretion to allow that distinction or a different name to appear on the ballot rather than the legal given name or registered voter's name as a candidate on the ballot. But I think there is this threshold issue on whether or not the petitions that have been circulated identify the candidate by one name, whether we can shift midstream here to a different name. I do understand the thread that Mr. Alto is trying to draw between Rocky Neal and Cruz appearing on the ballot, followed by a number of other letters that complete the candidate's name. So I don't think it's as clear to those that are signing the petition who they are nominating or who they are supporting or saying is qualified to be a candidate for this office. So it's an interesting analogy, though the board has the discretion on whether or not it believes that is precedent setting, and the shortened name technically appearing on the petition, nominating petition, the declaration of candidacy satisfies the informing of the voters that are signing that petition and nominating that individual for office. The standard for the form is prescribed by the revised code on how the nominating petition, declaration of candidacy petition is to appear. And it's not a strict compliance, it's a substantial compliance. And the board has broad discretion on determining whether or not the petition form substantially complies with what's prescribed in the revised code. I don't want to substitute my judgment for yours. You as board members have the authority and power to make that determination whether or not where the form says candidate's name states one thing and the petitioner wants it to state something shorter. Whether that substantially complies with the form requirement and whether or not his name stated on the petition is what is carrying through to the ballot. So I think that's kind of a meandering, I can't find any solid guidance in case law or otherwise. It's really within the board's discretion whether or not to allow this to go forward and allow a candidate to deviate from their name on the petition declaration of candidacy to the ballot. Kind of at this point in the process.
Okay. Mr. Mustin, thank you.
I'm sorry, I had another
If I
question.
may, I just, I personally feel that we would be setting a dangerous precedent here by allowing this to happen. I don't see a problem with the person using the full name. If everybody knows him by Cruz, I believe that he could during his campaigning he could draw those distinctions, and those people that know him by Brian Cruz will vote for him naturally. So I don't think I can support this because I think it's precedent setting, and I'm very very leery to begin something along those lines right now.
Would either of you like to make a motion so that we can have something under consideration?
I'd be happy to make a motion, or I'll let my colleague, Mr. Wondolowski, do it. But I just had another question, either for our council or for Mr. Alto, if I might, Rob, just ask this one last question.
Please.
I do recall we've had a number of name sort of cases come before us, and I don't recall there ever, I know we've had a number of nickname cases. Honestly, I don't recall there being a case where the chosen name was a change in the last name. And I just don't know if either Counselor Alto or our legal counsel, either during their research, had come across a change where it was the actual last name that a candidate wanted to change and put on the ballot. I just don't recall us having that kind of case. Do you guys recall that, or have you come across that? Or maybe Rob, you recall that?
Right. I don't either. And so I'll ask Mr. Alto first. Are you aware of any case law?
Sure. So
on that point?
So no, I'm not aware of any case law. I cited the Ohio Election Officials Manual, the Chapter 4, and it doesn't differentiate. It doesn't specify whether it's a first name or last name. It just says name, derivative of the candidate's natural name. It does provide several examples, such as Rich for Richard or Bill. It provides examples that are first names, but just a plain reading of the rule would indicate that it should be allowed for the candidate's name, first, middle, last, whatever. Since it doesn't specify, I believe the plain reading would indicate that it should be allowed for whether the first name or the last name.
Thank you. And I said case law, but you addressed it more broadly anyway, which was the question. So thank you. And Mr. Mustin, are you aware of any prior instances before this board or direction from the Secretary of State or case law on this point of whether a nickname for a last name has ever been allowed and used by a board of elections in Ohio?
No, I'm not aware of any that distinguish first name nickname or last name nickname. They just use nickname very broadly.
Okay.
Mr. Frost, am I allowed to ask a question to the board?
Well, I didn't hear any immediate objections from my co-members. So certainly, if you can keep it brief, we will entertain your question.
I apologize. This setting and situation is completely new to me. As a week and a half ago, I've decided to run for public office. I guess my reasoning and my thought process was, if I had put Brian Cruz, the whole reason for me to do that was to actually get accepted to that deadline. My question is, if I had put Brian Cruz, very similar and not to belabor this, if I had put Donald Duck and submitted that, would I have been approved or disapproved, no different than that. And
So,
I use Donald Duck as a completely.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know that we can answer the hypothetical, but I understand your point, and we may even address that as we arrive at a decision. So let us hold that for a moment. It's a good point you've raised.
Right.
And let me again ask.
Sorry, that was the sole purpose of me doing such.
Okay, thank you. Let me
Mr. Frost, for clarification, yes. Are we, in our decision today, are we denying his petition, or we're just not allowing him to use Cruz and he has to use Krzyzewski?
I believe the matter before us is as a request from a candidate. I believe the petitions have already been accepted, so I think it would be a motion to accept or deny his request of how to appear on the ballot.
So he's going to be on the ballot no matter what.
We may need to hear again from Mr. Lawler, but that was my understanding.
Yes, he will be on the ballot. It's just a question of how his last name will appear.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Lawler. Would either of my fellow members care to make a motion to approve or deny the
sure.
Candidate's request?
Mr. Chairman, in light of the discussion today, I would move that we deny the request for the name change and to have the candidate use his full legal last name.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. All right. Would either of you care to, I don't know, Dave, you've made the motion, so would you like to speak to your motion?
Yeah, no, just again, I just feel it's precedent setting. I feel better that we're not denying the individual's right to be on the ballot, so we're not taking that away. I just think that I'm very reluctant to try to set a precedent by making a decision. There's no case law on this. I'm looking at this from a very, very practical standpoint as opposed to a legal standpoint. I just don't think it makes any sense to start this precedent or set this precedent at this point in time. Thank you.
And I plan to support the motion. I do feel strongly that, the differentiating factor for me is that where we accepted the chosen name of a candidate, it actually did appear on the declaration, and on the petition form. Obviously, if it had been Donald Duck, we would not have been so. I would not have been so persuaded that that would be an appropriate chosen name that potentially wouldn't cause confusion. But we have people that signed a petition that indicated that this was the name that would appear on the ballot. I don't think you're harmed in any respect. Wish you the best of luck with your candidacy, but I just I do think this starts a slippery slope if we start allowing folks to change the legal name that they've actually printed on the declaration form. So, and in the absence of any case law that gives us some clear guidance, I would say that we need to stick with the name as it appears on the declaration and petition form.
Thank you both, and I'll give you my comments, which to some degree are moot. I agree with my fellow members in part, and I disagree a little bit in part based on what we've heard. I think more agreement than disagreement, though. Mr. Alto, I do think your argument, and supported to a great degree by our legal counsel, I do think that a candidate can run with a nickname for their last name. I think that can happen. I think that you've made a good case here that Cruz is a natural derivative of Krzyzewski, if I'm pronouncing that right, Mr. Cruz. And I think your argument that the word Cruz, Kruse, that was on the petition. And I'm not so worried that I'm not worried, I think, as I hear Mr. Wondolowski saying and Ms. Davis-Chappelle, that there's a dangerous precedent, because I think it is a limited instance. I think that Mr. Wondolowski actually gave the best example I could have thought of, which is his own last name. That I do know Dave Wondolowski as Wando or as Dave Wondolowski, and so I think that is comparable. But what we had from this candidate beyond that was quite a bit of evidence that he has business cards and contracts and other things in the community. And I really do think it comes down to less the Neal case than the Morrison case, that it is what the community knows him as. And what I really heard in what I read from our legal counsel earlier is that it is within our discretion. So I think this is within our discretion to allow him to appear that way as Brian Cruz. I intend to vote no on the motion, but you can already hear that I'm outnumbered. And I will, in my final comment, address Mr. Krzyzewski's question, which is, it's a very good question, and I would be worried if you had filled out your petition the other way, that you might not have a majority of this board supporting your ability to run as Cruz, whereas the way you filled out your petitions, you're not in danger of not appearing on the ballot. And so I fully agree with my fellow members on that point. I think this is a close call that, to my belief, is within our discretion, and I understand their decision to, in their discretion, come down on the other side. And I'll now, if there's no further discussion, I'll now call the vote. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor of the motion, please signify by aye.
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 Any opposed? Opposite sign, nay. And Mr. Hastings is abstaining. He has recused himself from this process. The motion passes to deny your request to appear on the ballot as Brian Cruz. Mr. Cruz or Krzyzewski, I wish you the best. And Mr. Alto, thank you for your presentation here today. And I will now turn the gavel back over to our chairman, Mr. Hastings.
Thank you, board members.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Good luck with your campaign.
Bruce, thank you, Mr. Alto. Thank you, Mr. Frost, for wonderful handling that over Zoom. I will then move to certify, now that that matter has been cleared up, certify the candidates and issues for the May 4th, 2021 primary election. If there's a second.
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 Any further question or discussion? Hearing none, all those signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Lawler. And on to human resources, Mr. Pilati.
Today in our board packet, we provided a personnel agenda on several items going here at the agency. The first item on the agenda is a resignation of Sheila McNay. Just want to acknowledge that resignation. A promotion for Mary Bajani, who is currently a auditor in our campaign finance department, and to the administrative assistant and clerk to the Republican board members. Next, would like to recommend Alexandra, goes by Alex Skufka, to the position of program coordinator in the election officials department. Alex had worked for us for the first time this past November's election cycle as a temporary employee in the election support department, and then also worked in the command center that we had on election day. She's been a real strong temporary employee with a great skill set, organized, did well under pressure in the command center, and also she comes to us with good computer software and web site experience. And in the election officials department, as we push forward with more online-based training and videos, her skill set will work very nicely in that department. So we'll recommend her as an appointment. At this point, the next action on the agenda, Ms. Trapman, we're going to pause on that for this election or this meeting, and maybe bring that up at a future meeting. Next is a reclassification and actually also a promotion for Jessica King. At our last board meeting, Chantel and I talked about in the ballot department doing a limited internal posting for those supervisors, with one of them to become an assistant manager. We did post that for a week's time. 2 candidates did apply, Jessica King and Kevin Zaremba. Interviews were had for that, and Jessica, while Kevin did a nice job, Jessica definitely had a stronger skill set, better leadership and supervisory skills that are needed. And what she did during the vote by mail process, and as we incorporated new technologies into that with our Agilis sorting machine, the OPEX mailers, she took it upon herself and showed the initiative to learn that equipment and how can we best utilize it into our processes and procedures. And that is in large part why we're recommending her for the promotion and reclassification to assistant manager and ballot. The next item on the agenda is a reclassification of title for Patrick McAlay. His current title is Senior Absentee Voting Specialist. Patrick works in the Fiscal Services Department, and that's a title that he had when he was more involved with the vote by mail process. The title doesn't make any sense. His salary would remain the same. And since coming into the Fiscal Services Department, Patrick has done a really good job. He has taken a leadership role in that department as we transition into this new county Infor computer system, which unfortunately we hear a lot of bad things in the newspaper about. It really is a complex, challenging, and messy system. Patrick volunteers to learn all he can with that and help Kendra navigate through this new system. So we'd like to just retitle him to assistant manager, which actually was his title prior to senior absentee voting specialist. And the last item on the agenda is a reclassification and restructure. And one of the items that, again, Chantel and I talked about, one of our goals is kind of doing a little bit of restructuring. There's not a lot to do. The Jessica King move, the Patrick McAlay, and this vacant position are in that spirit of the reclassification. And what we want to do is take a vacant supervisor position that exists now in the election officials department that we're not going to fill and move it over to Robin Roy in the IT department. And this position, known as a system administrator, will take on the key responsibilities of working with our servers in the network. So we have over 20 plus servers in this agency that we have to maintain. And a lot of our cybersecurity, when those patches come down for related cybersecurity, we apply them to the server. And sometimes something comes from Secretary of State, has to be done that day. Other times we have a little bit more window, but basically about on a weekly basis, we're patching our servers. Also, in order to do that, you have to have an understanding of the network. And the network is how all these computers in this agency connect into these servers so they're all functioning. And again, cybersecurity plays into that. And so this person really becomes kind of a backup for Robin on the server side, the network side, and with cybersecurity, where some of the other staff in the department, such as Helen and Mary Hannah, they're focused on the database side. So they're dealing with DIMS, which is different. So this will have a backup. This would give that to him. And Robin, while he does a great job, and we recognized him at our last meeting, he is really stretched to the limit. The Secretary of State is adding additional cybersecurity measures we need to take into place. And that's just the way of the future. And so this will allow us to stay on top of that and keep, a lot of this in-house, because we do talk with the county IT department. They just don't have the resources or the ability to send staff when we need them to make the quick turnaround changes. A lot of our systems run differently because the way we are set up, our cybersecurity is different than the main counties. And so we need this internal staff who can learn our expertise of what we need to function here. And so that's what that last one is take that vacant position, reclassify it to system administrator. And this title, by the way, this is in working with the county's Andy Moles, who is I think an interim chief information officer for the IT department there. Based on his recommendation, this is what he said that what we need here is this position here, because when we do ask for assistance, it's a lot of times in these key areas. The Archer company actually does the class plan for the main county as well as for us. So this position, we were able to take and plug it in. And Lori, I think, did actually talk to Archer to where it would fall on our pay scale and the job title that currently exists within the county. So I know I said a whole lot there, but that's what this last position is. And it's actually, I think, something that is much needed here because technology only grows in all businesses.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair. Yeah. Is the plan then to post this position to be filled?
That's correct. Yes, we'll have to post it externally to fill it.
Any other questions for Mr. Pilati? I will move then to accept the personnel agenda, specifically the resignation of Ms. McNay, the promotion of Mary Bajani, the appointment of Alex Skupka, reclassification of Jessica King, and the reclassification of Patrick McAlay, as well as the reclassification of a supervisor's vacant position, election officials, to system administrator for the information systems department. There's a second?
Seconded, did you include Tiffany Trapnell on that appointment?
They withdrew that from the agenda today.
Okay. Second.
Doc, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that motion passes unanimously, and on to new business. Mr. Pilati or Ms. Soto?
I believe the first item is the high turnout. So I'm going to briefly discuss some research and data that we've gathered to address 11 of the polling locations that were brought to our attention from the November 2020 presidential election. Those locations are locations that had a high turnout on election day and longer lines as the close of the polls started to approach in the evening on the afternoon of the election. There were a total of 11 locations and 77 precincts make up for those. So it's about 8% of our overall allocation for precincts and polls for the November 2020 election day. Some of the things that we looked at for these locations were turnout by each polling location, the number of precincts that we had assigned, because 7 of these 11 locations were in fact our consolidated locations. We had reports of long lines in the mid-afternoon through the evening, so we took a close look at the number of individuals who came in and checked in by hour, specifically those locations that had a higher turnout towards the end of the day, which is not typical for our curve of election turnout for the polls. We also looked at the average processing time and how many voters were processed post 7:30 p.m. All of the equipment logs, specifically those from the DS200s. And then for these 11 locations, deeper dive into all the issue tracker and reports from the poll workers on election day, including those pink memos that they fill out and get back to us at the end of the election. Some of the common themes that we identified after going through all this data was that, and you'll see in the chart that was submitted, so there's 3 additional documents that were submitted with the packet. That includes one chart of just a table of information for the location, number of curbside voters, number of voters there after 7:30 again, and a chart that kind of places the turnout for the election day, and finally a chart to show how quickly we were processing the voters each hour. So we did find that all of these locations, and all 11 locations, staffing was not the issue. For example, Rocky River Civic Center is one of the locations that was our location. We did have 7 individuals, CEOs, stationed to work that location. We did also note that the speed of the voter check-in per electronic poll book was very similar to previous elections. This election, the average time it took to process a voter on our electronic poll books was 1 minute and 7 seconds. That is closer to 1 minute and 1 or 2 seconds in previous elections, but all in all, I think that's pretty close to what we're used to. And these 11 locations definitely had the same average per book for check-in, but you'll start to see the difference, and probably I think what attributed mostly to the long lines at the end of the day has to do with the above average countywide election day turnout. So of these locations, the average election day turnout for our polling locations was about 28.89%. Every single one of these locations, with the exception of one that was in Cleveland, which I think is on this list for different reasons, the average election day turnout was somewhere in the 30%. So there was a higher election day turnout. There was a significant number of curbside voters that came to check in at these polling locations. In these 11 locations, a total of 1,170 curbside voters came to the polls to check in. And again, these 11 locations make up 77 precincts, which is just under 8% of our total precincts in the election. However, 1,170 curbside voters is about 36% of our entire curbside votes cast for this poll, for this election. We also saw a steady increase in voter check-ins in the late afternoon through the evening, and that's something that's shown on the chart of these elections. Almost all of these locations started to see an increase around 3 o'clock, and that the number of voters that were processed per hour just continued to climb until about 7 o'clock. We did note that there were 4 locations that actually did have a significant number of voters checked in after 7:30 p.m. So while we were calling to check to see which locations had lines towards the end of the day, it is safe to say that 4 of these 11 locations had voters a significant line up until about 8:40 p.m. So the 2 with the biggest issues were Broadview Heights Community Center and Burke Park Recreation Center. They did check in 329 and 350 voters respectively after 7:30 p.m. Both finished right at about 8:40 p.m. with all of their voters, and that does include curbside. I will note that the other 7 on the list did not have a line at 7:30. I know that Rocky River is a location that continues to be brought up in this scenario. They processed their last voter at 7:29 p.m. Just to kind of.
But Rocky River had lines during it.
They had lines during the day. They had a significant number of voters show up throughout the day. Theirs was steady. So I would just argue that the other locations, when we talk about as far as staffing or the number of e-public check-ins, that it was a steady stream of voters at Rocky River, but we were able to continuously get them through the process. I think it was just more than what they were used to on election day. It did not cause an overflow of voters after the close of polls like we saw in the other 4 locations. And all in all, I think the biggest lesson that we learned from looking at this data is that we have an insufficient number of electronic public check-in stations. So one thing that we did with the help of the election support department prior to this election is determine what type of equipment we were going to reduce from these polling locations. And that the reason behind that being social distancing. We knew that our rooms were only so big and that we would have to, where we before would be able to fit, say 50 voting booths for individuals who mark their ballots and an infinite number of check-in stations, just for the simple fact that we had to keep everything 6 feet apart from each other. It really did limit the number of items that we could place inside. Our experience has showed us that the bottleneck on election day typically is is filling out your ballot. So that would be the voting booth portion. That takes the longest. It takes approximately a minute to check in a voter. It takes approximately 15 seconds for a voter to scan 2 to 3 sheets of a ballot. And it takes anywhere from 3 to 4 minutes for a voter to complete the ovals and fill out and mark their ballot. So based on this research and data that we have from previous elections, we focused on keeping the number of voting booths the same. And I think that that was a mistake now looking back. We needed to increase the number of check-in stations that we have. I think the voters, it's almost as simple as the time trials that we have for the elections on how long it takes for a voter to fill out the ballot fluctuates so much from location to location. It's hard to just hang your hat on that one statistic solely. And I think that's one thing that we plan to do differently. We've looked at the Visio diagram, which are our location setup diagram, and now I'm kind of moving into our action items. We know that we need to take a look at all of those, especially these 11 locations, and determine how many more check-in stations we can fit before we have to reduce other equipment. And then also, I think, reduce the number of voting booths and possibly DS200 scanners in order to get 1 or 2 more electronic public check-ins there. Probably the most significant change that we're making to these 11 locations is I think that 5 of these already we're reducing the number of precincts that report to these locations. and election support is working on those now. Some of them are going back to locations that we had prior to 2019. Others were pulling anywhere from 2 to 5 precincts out of these locations. We also plan to, in addition to changing our electronic poll book allocation, not only for the check-ins for these locations, but also for the curbside voting, where we did in 2020 allocate 1 electronic poll book for curbside voting purposes only. We'd like to, in the locations that we had a higher curbside turnout, allocate more than just 1 book for those. We also want to take a look at streamlining the curbside voting process as a whole, specifically in these locations where we had such a high turnout for that. We did not, since curbside has always been something that has been offered to our voters, we were anticipating a higher than normal turnout of curbside voters. We were not anticipating over 3,000 curbside ballots being cast in this election. I think that surprised us all. We do need to work with the flow of traffic. It's that simple. We don't have an in and out of these locations. I think that at least you, Mr. Chairman, Wondolowski, Board Member Wondolowski, were out of locations and witnessed this firsthand of what the curbside voter process looked like, and we have a lot to do in terms of how do we streamline where those cars go physically at these polling locations.
Is there an issue beyond the stream, the flow of the cars and the traffic? Because it, you know, from the anecdotal information being given to us about delays at these locations, a lot of it seemed to be that, you know, the staff that was dedicated to handle the voters inside really, you know, couldn't do what they needed to do because they were attending to the curbside voters. And so I'm just wondering if there is a need, or if you guys took a look at, you know, whether or not there needed to be more dedicated staff to handle curbside, or whether or not, I don't know if this is even possible, could there be some sort of, I'm just using this loosely, pre-registration kind of process for curbside voters, so that, you know, we would have an idea in advance of an election. I mean, it wouldn't capture everybody necessarily. People could still drive up and determine they couldn't get in or whatever, but it just seems to me that there seems to be a bigger problem other than the flow of cars and traffic to address the curbside situation.
Yeah, there are 2 additional items that I have here under action items. One is exactly what you just mentioned, and that would be identifying multiple curbside voting teams, because we failed to do that this election. I think that we learned that we had 1 team dedicated, but you're absolutely right. Inside of those locations, people could not focus on, you know, any of the duties that we had them assigned to, because they were either outside assisting with curbside or were not supplementing that curbside voting staff because they were inside assigned to other duties. And I think that we do need to assign roles prior to election day and address those roles in training, so we have adequate number of staff. Maybe an initial crew that is assigned to the curbside voting process, but then also have backup teams already assigned to the location. So in the event that the curbside voting does pick up on election day, that we have teams already in place that can just step right in. As far as what you mentioned, you know, the pre-registration, that's you know, I don't think we have talked about that, but we could definitely look into that. I'm not sure how that would work, but I think it's worth taking a look into. At this point, we're open to really any suggestion making the curbside voting process better.
Thank you.
And just quickly, one more thing that I wanted to mention about this process is when taking a look at the audit logs, we did note that we had 17,000 voters across the entire election not remove their stub from their ballot before inserting them into the DS200. That's a really high number and percentage as far as how many previous elections. And I think that we need to do a better job as far as voter education and also poll worker training, and just reminding those voters to remove the stub. And I think that's important to bring up in this analysis, because we did, again, this represents about 8% of the precincts, but it represented about 13% of the issues with stub removal on election day. So again, just a little higher percentage of those experiencing that.
And what's the significance of that stub removal?
So when the voter does not remove the stub from the ballot, they insert that into the DS200, and a DS200 is about 60% more likely to jam on the return of a ballot back to a voter. So it will stop. It will say you need to remove the ballot from, or remove the stub from the ballot and insert the ballot again. And
The purpose of the stub, though, is to identify that a ballot was voted, right?
that's correct. And we do have a process for removing that stub and placing it into a reconciliation envelope next to the DS200 scanner prior to the voter actually casting their ballot. And the issue just is simply that the DS200 will not accept a ballot with that stub still on it. So we recently, about probably 18 months ago, went from 2-stub system to a 1-stub system, which we found to be easier with our electronic poll book system. We were the last holdout of all 88 counties that was still using a 2-stub system. I think it's as simply as our voters, it's not as noticeable when they only have to remove the 1 stub instead of the 2.
Thank you. Okay, any questions for Chantel? Okay, voting and tabulation equipment acquisition process, Mr. Gallagher. Good morning, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Is this something the board members have, Tony?
Yes, they were,
Email.
it should have been emailed to them.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Tony Gallagher, Election and Compliance Administrator. As part of our ongoing voting equipment and tabulation system acquisition process, the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections hosted a virtual security summit on Friday, February 5th. The event centered around our virtual presentations from each of the 3 remaining certified vendors, Clear Ballot, ES&S, and Hart InterCivic. The presentations focused on security of the hardware and software of the 3 tabulation systems. The system had 2 sessions, a public morning session and a private afternoon session. The morning session, public session, consisted of 3 20-minute presentations from each of the 3 vendors. We had sent out 35 personal invitations to voter advocacy groups and stakeholders, including the League of Women Voters, NOVA, the NAACP, Tri-C, and Cuyahoga County's Democratic and Republican parties, just to name a few. A public notice was also posted on our website and advertised on social media, and notices were sent to all the local media outlets. 26 people registered for the for the morning session, of which 15 attended. We had a total of, so for the morning, we had a total of 55 people observed the presentations. 12 were from the invited groups, 2 from the Secretary of State's office, 20 from our own Board of Election staff, and 20 people viewed it on YouTube. We also had County Information Security Officer Jeremy Neal attend here in person. A recording of the morning session is available on our website. For the afternoon session, we consisted of 3 separate sessions, with each vendor giving a 30-minute presentation with 15 minutes of question and answers. We had 26 people receive personal invitations, and that included our board members, county council members, county IT professionals, and representatives from the Secretary of State's office. We had 11 people registered and 9 people attended. All in all, we had 31 people who observed the presentations, 2 from county agencies, 4 from the Secretary of State's office, 2 of our board members, 23 from the Board of Election staff, and Jeremy Neal attended here in person. The content of the presentations from the vendors. They discussed a variety of security-related topics, including their product security features, corporate ownership, employee background checks, and other personnel policies. They also addressed issues like managing of the supply chain integrity and how they conduct their testing and certification. During the QA portion, multiple questions were asked by the Cuyahoga County's Information Security Officer, Jeremy Mayo, and the Board of Elections Chief Information Officer, Robin Roy. They both provided a high level of technical expertise for the board. After the event, they confirmed that there were no red flags from either of the vendors and that all the vendors had satisfactorily answered the technical security questions. From the morning session, we did receive 3 email questions. All 3 of the questions dealt with BOE procedures and the selection process. From the afternoon session, we did receive several questions live at the time. Where do the vendors do business? And in your report, you have a listing there of the states and counties that the states around the United States and the Ohio counties that they do business. Where their design, programming, and development is done in manufacturing. Each of the vendors answered those questions, and also whether they had election security breaches. So that concluded an overall view of what our summit consisted of. As we look ahead at some of the next steps in our acquisition process, one of them will be, this week we're going to be reaching out to other county board of elections who are currently using each of these voting equipment vendors. We'll be asking them about experience, vendor support, equipment performance, and about the feedback from their coworkers and from the public. The next big step after that would be a mock election. We're planning to conduct the mock election with all 3 vendors around the 2nd week in June. The mock election will give BOE staff an additional chance to work with each of the vendors and give advocacy groups and poll workers and the general public an opportunity to compare and contrast the election day experience with each of the 3 vendors. Following that would be a recommendation to the board. Our plan is to deliver the committee recommendation around the beginning of July. And the steps after the vendor is selected would pretty much, Chantil provided some of the steps that we had from our electronic poll book purchase, and those would include step 1, finalize items and services to the purchase of from the selected vendor. Step 2, obtain final proposal and draft contract from the vendor. Step 3, submit vendor proposal and draft contract to the board members and prosecutor's office. Step 4, submit resolution to county council. And step 5, submit a sublease purchase agreement to council. And step 6 is draft and approve the maintenance contract.
And just to clarify, these steps are somewhat similar to the steps that are from the electronic public process, but were not taken from that document. They're actually outlined in Secretary of State Directive 2018-04, which outlines the process for us.
What, is there a committee you have staff?
There is.
Who's on that? Do you know?
It is led by Tony Gallagher, and we have representatives from the ballot department management team, election support, as well as individuals from IT and election officials.
Maybe, we can talk about this later, but maybe we should have a board member, one from each party, just kind of participating remotely, or instead of just bringing the whole package to the board and say, look at all the work we've done. You know, one or two of us could attend in addition, just to kind of keep our board members up to date about or ask questions that board members might ask during the process. So you've got it in there. But we'll talk about that, and I'm sure we could find a Democrat or Republican that would be willing to do that, and you can keep us in the loop when you meet as a group. Okay. So
That's a great, Mr. Chair, that's a great suggestion. I found the session that you and I attended to be very informative. So look forward to hearing more and even participating on a committee or however we determine to allocate the responsibility for that. Thank you.
You're on it. You're on the committee on it, Joe.
Oh, yes, that was me volunteering.
No, and quite honestly, I welcome that because we don't want to get to the end and all of a sudden it's like, but did you guys do this or that, whatever it is, you know, that's why that's welcome. So we can make sure we get it all in there as we go along because it is a big purchase.
We currently meet on Thursdays at 11 a.m., but we certainly, I say that to say we meet once a week. We picked that time for no real reason, so we can just work with you guys to come up with a.
We'll do that. We'll coordinate that, and maybe we can do it via Zoom too for some of the board members.
Absolutely.
So, all right, terrific. Thank you for that update, Tony. Any questions for Tony? All right, thank you, Mr. Gallagher. And the update on the Woodmere and Mayfield Village elections.
Just quickly hit on that. I'll start off with Woodmere. This week here is when the voting hours for early in person increase. 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Today through Friday. And then this weekend is actually the hours, we will be open for weekend voting for Woodmere. Saturday 8 to 4 and Sunday 1 to 5. So far, we've had 13 early in-person voters, and we've had 37 individuals request vote by mail ballots. Of those, 12 of them have already come back to us. On Monday of next week, election support will be delivering the equipment in the afternoon out to the one polling location in Woodmere, and we'll get that set up. We won't do a Monday night organizational meeting like we typically do because we'll be setting it up and we'll actually be staffing it with our staff, both inside and outside, meaning the rover function and the poll worker function with our own staff on Tuesday. On Tuesday, voting like always, 6:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. And at the end of the day, staff, not only will we pack up like we typically do, the ballots and the memory sticks, but we're actually, election support then will load up the scanners and everything, and we'll clear out the poll place so we don't have to go back again days after to collect all our information or get all our equipment. So we'll do that. We have not scanned any vote by any of the 12 vote by mail ballots yet. We did have the public pre-test last Friday, went well, and we plan this Friday to go ahead and scan, just not to wait until election day to make sure which everything should go fine, will go fine because we passed the test. But basically, we're in good shape. We're ready for this election, and we'll go ahead and execute it well.
There's plenty of space where you're voting in Woodmere and Mayfield Village.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yes. And then Mayfield Village. Actually, today is the close of registration for Mayfield Village. Well, Betty will have staff here till 9 p.m. For that close of registration. We have 58 vote by mail requests already. We do have those ballots, and we've actually built those ballot packs. They're all ready to go. We're doing that here in-house, and tomorrow we will take those 58 ballot packs to the post office, and we will then start, while we're open this weekend for Woodmere only, early in-person voting for Mayfield Village does start Wednesday. That is 8 to 4, and that will be Wednesday through Friday of this week. Brent and CPS is voting everything on the second floor. They have separate machines, so we can keep everything isolated and not have any kind of discrepancies with that. So that's Mayfield Village. Also, you had asked a question on a couple other items I wanted to hit on real quick. If no one has any questions on Mayfield Village or Woodmere. And those two items, the first is the Center for Tech and Civic Life grant, the CTCL grant. We did get approval for an extension. That extension, we have to utilize the funds by June 30th of 2021. We have a remaining balance on that grant of $650,000, 547, 650,547.
Are there any restrictions on that?
Yeah, so they came back with more restrictions in this extension period, and basically they came up with 3 categories which we can expend the rest of the funds. The first that deals with staffing and administrative costs related to the November 2020 election, and they identified closing out voter history from November's election, responding to any media or public information requests that are related to the November 2020 election, and then any equipment that we would need to execute the voter history or the information requests. So that's the first category. The second category is payment of invoices or expenses that were incurred in November 2020 in that general election that are still outstanding. Kendra, believe it or not, is still getting some invoices in from that election cycle, but hopefully we'll have all those in short order and we'll be done with that so we can use the funding for that. And the third category is expenses related to the safe administration of elections taking place in 2021 during a pandemic. So that's forward thinking here. So initially, before we knew of these restrictions, we met as a group and we thought that we were going to use some of this funding for just procure general equipment such as new ballot bags or other items that maybe we would anticipate we would need to purchase as we get new voting equipment. But through this criteria, we can't utilize it for those items there. So we want to, and this was part of our initial thought too, was automation of processes. So our focus is really going a lot to, or will primarily be focused on equipment that facilitates automation of our processes, because the more automation we have, that typically requires less staff, which then, as we're trying to be socially distant through the pandemic, it kind of facilitates that third category. And an example of automation is last year we got the Runback Agilis ballot returning sorting machine, and you can continue to grow that with sorting pockets. And so that's something where we'll want to do that and build upon that. A pocket of 4, an output is 25,000. So it adds up kind of quick, but that's kind of what we're thinking at this point in time. Terrific. For that. And then the other item is the performance evaluations for our employees. Lori has been revising the performance evaluations, and what we're doing is kind of moving away from the numeric rating system that we previously had and going more with like alpha ranges. And so meaning like instead of having a 1, 2, 5, or 7 or whatever, you'd have something such as sometimes above standard, needs some improvement, those types of categories. Because with the number ratings, what we have found is that the reviewer spent more time focusing on the overall employee score as opposed to really using these things as performance growth tools and trying to hone in on what, where are you and how can you improve. Also, the numbers a lot of times come into effect when you have money in the budget for merit-based raises, and the county hasn't put that kind of money forward for us to do that. Also, the numbers become a source of contention amongst the staff. So this way, going away from that, we're going to give input, and hopefully people will take it to heart and grow. We have 2 versions. The non-managerial one is about there, but the managerial one or the supervisory one, Lori is just kind of fine-tuning. Need a little bit more work on getting those categories honed in. Shane Thiel and I have announced at a team meeting to the management team that what this concept is with these, and that these will be rolling out soon. I would say that probably within 1 to 2 weeks, we'll be able to get these out to staff.
Evaluating the 2020 performance then?
Yeah, 2020.
Okay, right. I mean, I just think they're important for not only managers, but also for employees for feedback and provides documentation.
Yep.
That's necessary. Okay, what about District 11? Anything new on that? Have you heard anything?
No.
I just had a question, and I just had a question on the grant, and before we move forward, if I could ask, just quickly, are we able to use, I mean, that's a lot of money. Are we able to use any of those dollars for voter education? You've just identified some of the high election day turnout locations, the curbside voting piece. Any of those dollars that might be able to be used to implement some of the action items you guys just identified?
I think so as we do the online training, the force and university programs, I think that those qualify because we're in a pandemic situation. So I think as far as like the training coming up with different videos and things like that for the training of the staff to execute curbside voting. I think that definitely falls in that window.
We'd also be able to spend money on equipment that, if we needed to streamline the process at those particular locations. So because curbside voting and the increase of curbside voting is a direct impact of the pandemic, I think that we'll be able to buy equipment. If we wanted signs or, I can't think of anything else, another good example off the top of my head, but the short answer to your question is yes, I think.
Okay. Yeah, just before we start, changing precincts and reducing precincts and sending people to new locations, if there's a way to automate or improve the efficiencies at the locations with the money, that'd be great. Thank you so much. I know you guys are still thinking about it.
And you've heard nothing about the election?
No, the only thing I know is that I think the Senate's in recess this week, so there shouldn't be any confirmations. I will say that March 5th is 60 days out, so we're really, I don't know how we do this in May, but that's up for the governor and the Secretary of State to figure out.
Okay, terrific. And I'm assuming they'll consult with you and the boards.
Yeah, and really, all they're doing is really working with Cuyahoga Summit.
Right. Okay, terrific. Any other questions under new business from the board members to the staff?
I have none.
Okay, here.
Yes,
Linda.
if I might.
Oh, please, Rob.
Mr. Ashley, not a question so much. If I might have a moment, as this will be my last meeting, I just wanted to make a brief remark or two.
Wait, well, let me, I'm going to use the chair to overturn your request, okay? And then it's kind of like the last putt, okay, Rob, in a golf tournament? You're going to make the last putt, okay? So let me do this.
Okay.
On behalf of my board members, and on my behalf and the staff, the wonderful one we've had with you on board, Rob, is coming to an end. You've been a committed and valued member of this board, serving from May of 2007 to April 2011 and March of 2013 through today's last meeting. Your colleagues, Dave and Rina Joe, myself, I'm sure I speak for Sandy, along with Deb Sullivan too, and all the staff recognize you, Rob, for the important public service you provided, not only to the voters of Cuyahoga County, but to this Board of Elections. While serving as president of the Ohio Association of Election Officials from January 19th to January 20th, really putting this board on the map as far as the state goes and the Secretary of State. Board Member Frost, in a bipartisan fashion and manner, championing the important efforts that all Ohio boards of elections have taken and continue to take to ensure transparent, fair, and accurate elections, because that's what it's all about at the end of the day. Board Member Frost, through his leadership and determination, has earned our admiration, respect, and gratitude for his years of outstanding public service to the residents of this county and the state of Ohio, and for his efforts in upholding the values of democracy. The Cuyahoga County Board of Elections commends Board Member Frost for his leadership and selfless dedication to our Board of Elections. Rob, personally, I'll miss your talents and ability on this board, your friendship. You've added a lot to this organization, and on behalf of my colleagues on the board, we wish you only continued success and good health going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank
If I
you.
could just add my comments, Mr. Chair. I know Rob's going to putt, but I also wanted to thank him for his great service. And we've had a long run on the board from the original 07 appointment. So we've gotten to work together on a lot of different things. Appreciate your intellectual horsepower and your collegiality, and wish you all the best going forward. So thank you for serving with us.
Thank you, Andrew.
Also, Mr. Chair, if I may, I haven't served on the board with you, Rob, as long as the others have, but we've certainly built one heck of a friendship since I did get on the board, and I've always respected your positions on things that you've taken, and but I think overall we've worked very, very well together, and I'm going to miss you.
Very kind, very kind. So can I take my putt now?
Take your putt now and make it.
That certainly was unexpected but greatly appreciated, unnecessary, greatly appreciated. Thank you all. And it has been, well, I guess 14 years since I started serving on this board, 12 years total that I've served, with that 2-year gap in there that the chairman mentioned. And it's been a tremendous opportunity for me to be part of this team. And so I want to thank you all for allowing me to be part of the team with you. Dave, as you said, you're I guess, the newest addition, but it has been just absolutely tremendous experience and learning experience for me in working with you. And some of the things that we have been able to do together, I think 6 years that you've been on the board, that we've been working together. And Jeff, I've known you a long, long time, and to come over here with you in 2007, and for you to still be here, still going 14 years later, your amazing leadership is greatly appreciated, and your friendship. But I want to single out one person, and that's Ina Jo Davis Chappelle. You are a true inspiration and leader for this community. You are an example for us all. And I single you out in large part because you've chosen, unlike me, to come back for another 4 years. So congratulations on your expected reappointment by Secretary of State Frank LaRose. I intend to recommend to him, if he even cares to listen, that he should take the County Democratic Party's recommendation and reappoint you. And I'm sure that will be done post haste. I did not choose to stand for reappointment after much deliberation, and you all will have a very good and experienced member in public service and election law in Lisa Sticken-Lewis joining you very soon at the beginning of next month. So I still have a few days left, and in that time, I will be back by the board, Director Prelati, Deputy Director Sater. I hope to see you both there. I've had the opportunity to work with 3 directors and 3 deputy directors in my time on the board, and I have great confidence in your leadership, Director and Deputy Director. I know this board and this agency are in good hands. And most of all, I want to thank our amazing staff. The employees and staff and management that we have here at the CCBOE, just no matter what is asked of them, everyone from administrative staff to frontline employees, to specialists and supervisors, assistant managers, all the way on up the chain. The job that everyone does with everything that is thrown at a board of elections in a time, and just we don't have to look any further back than the course of the last 12 months, with what could have been a real problematic election, where there were a lot of wrinkles thrown at us, from epidemics to challenges of many types, to changes in how we might be voting. This agency, and mainly by and through the employees of this agency, rose to the occasion. I am proud to have been a teammate of you all, and I'll probably be back at times too. So thank you for the recognition earlier. Again, very much appreciated.
Thank you, Rob. Well said, well said. Well, you're not done yet. We don't have any public comment, correct, Linda?
None that I'm aware of.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to make a motion to go into executive session then.
Excuse me. I actually emailed Linda and asked to reserve time for public comment.
Oh, sure. Thank you for interrupting, Adele. Let's do this now because we're going to go into executive session. I don't want to make staff or yourselves wait for our meeting. So I've got the clock going, and please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, good snowy afternoon to everyone. And Rob, I just want to say it's been good to see you at the meetings. The reason I wanted to reserve time was specifically regarding the security summit, the latest security summit, and the procurement processes that have gone on with voting equipment of all sorts, not just voting and tabulation equipment, but with the electronic poll books. The fact that the last, what was called a security summit, the morning missed a lot of the robustness of a meeting. It lacked the Zoom capabilities of seeing who else was there with us. One could not hear what others' questions were. They were all to be submitted to one place, and it appeared that the answers were given privately to those people who submitted questions. As board member Chappelle said, the afternoon session was very informative. I didn't find the morning session very informative at all. Well, I found it minimal. Just as last January's session where people came and the public came, the people were handed over to sales talk, basically. And it was, we're the best and we have the best security and we have the best encryption, et cetera, without the chance for interplay of questions, without nationally known experts to be able to qualify it as a security summit. I found it greatly lacking. I cannot understand why a private session had to be done for board personnel, county IT professionals, and elected officials. That doesn't seem to be tight security at all to me. And I think the whole setup demeans the public's right to know. Elections belong to the public. We are just as invested as board officials and elected officials in our security. I think hearing the great information and being able to ask questions and hear from well-known professionals, experts in election computer security is preeminent, especially without that. That's how disinformation starts and gallops along halfway around the world before the truth gets a chance to get around once. I'm glad that there will be board members in the next sessions, but it seems as if the public is choked out of real participation in deciding how we vote and how our ballots are counted properly. And I really object heartily to that. There has to be a way. Procurement is a huge situation in election technology. I brought up to this board examples of Pennsylvania, Georgia, New York, about decisions that were made there where there were favors given before and after the contracts were set. It's an amazingly expensive contract, and it's technology that will be with for at least 10 years. So there has to be more transparency, and we can't ascribe all of this to security. We don't even have the board's security protocols, and that can be cleaned up so that you're not divulging anything that you don't want hackers to have, which is understandable, but we don't have any of that. And we're let known that elected officials have no security problems, but the public cannot hear the fulsomeness of the information that's necessary. I'm appalled, kind of. And it goes back to like the banner on the board, the CCBOE's Facebook page that says, our superpower is running elections. What's yours? That is, if you think about it, and if you sit and think about it for a second, that's offensive. What the public's superpower is, and what the public's power is in a democracy, is the ability to go and cast a vote and have it properly counted and accumulated. So the public's...
We're past the 5 minutes. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Hastings.
Okay, any other public comment? All right, hearing none, then I will handle the paperwork here. Make a motion to consider the appointment, discipline, complaints against public employees, and also pending litigation. If there's a second.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Wondolowski. I'm going to take a roll call vote. Mr. Frost?
Yes.
Ms. Ina Jo Davis Chappelle?
Yes.
Mr. Wondolowski?
Yes.
Hastings, yes. Okay, we'll go into executive session. I'd ask Ina, Joe, and Dave to get on the phone together, and then I can get Rob, and you can talk that way. Mark, you're going to come in with us.
Okay. Who do you want us to call, Jeff? Do you want us to call your cell?
So what I'm thinking is that we'll have you two get on the phone, and then I'll ask Tony to have staff maybe call them. Can they call one of them from our phone, hardline?
Yeah, we can.
No.
Why don't you have one? Yeah, staff call one of us, and then we'll get the other on the line.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect. Thanks.
I do know how to do that.
Where are you gonna do this from?
Well, that's a good question. Are we off online?
We can, I don't know if you want to go on
Wait
your
till we
office.
get off one.